So look, y'all, welcome. It's a pleasure to have y'all here today. I look forward to having this conversation with America's government teacher, Sharon McMahon. This is a timely conversation.
Mhm.
For those who aren't aware of who we are or who she is, who I am a former classroom U.S. history teacher of 10, 12 years, all right? But I always taught it from a Black perspective and the perspective of the people. I would say that broadly, not just Black perspective, but I really pulled a lot from Howard Zinn's book, A People's History of the U.S. That was what I did a lot of. Um, I was really motivated having been born and raised on the south side of Chicago, and then I went to U of I in Central Illinois, got a chance to take a Black history course that inspired me to teach. I dealt with the hate crime in 2016. Look, y'all, coincidentally, this happened during Trump's first rise, right? Crazy enough, none of us thought though that he would actually win. But even at that point in July 2016, his impact was felt because hate crimes are on the rise. I started making content, Sharon, right after I posted a video of what I dealt with. And I can't believe it's almost 10 years. And I'm telling you this, I just spoke to a group of kids this past weekend and I told them 10 years ago when I posted that video for justice, it was a better time for me to fight for justice doing that than if I posted it now. We see people now who get a video posted in an attempt to shame them raise tens of hundred, 300, 400, $500,000. So we, to me, it's hard to say it feels we regress, but it just feels like a lot of things are out in the open. And
Yeah.
I think for you, from our audience, I mean, I'm sure everybody knows who you are, but like as America's government teacher, where we come in with this is we both made a decision to teach this important topic of social science outside the class. And what a time to be alive. So like for you, um, I'm curious to know what was the moment though where you decided that you had to begin to teach this
Mhm.
important content. For me, social science is the most important content in the world. Sorry, math, sorry, science, sorry, English. We deal with the world, okay? We helping kids think. What
Mhm.
motivated you though to take that step?
Mm. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me. It's really good to be with you. And I just want to say a very quick thank you for all of your work. I know that the work you do, I want you to know and hear it from me that the work you do matters.
Thank
And that regardless of what is going to get thrown at you, I know you've had issues with getting kicked off of meta platforms and just randomly. Listen, there are people out here posting absolute trash, Nazi, KKK garbage, and they're still platformed. And the fact that you keep getting kicked off for no real reason is unbelievable. But I want you to hear it from me that what you're doing matters, that you need to keep going, that often when you start getting over the target is when the flack gets the hardest. And you should use this as a sign to do whatever you're doing even harder.
Appreciate that.
Do it even more.
Yeah.
And I know that it feels easy to be discouraged, especially in a moment like this where you're like, it's actually worse for me than it was 10 years ago. It's
Mm,
more dangerous for me than it was 10 years ago. I can completely understand that that is a discouraging environment to operate in. So I just want to take 10 seconds to just say, don't quit.
I
Like,
appreciate
the world needs your voice. You're doing things right. Okay, but back to, like, why I started doing what I'm doing, it was in the fall of 2020, so the mic drop. That's the full stop answer. It's September of 2020, okay? We're already seeing the previews of, like, "Oh, well, the election's about to get stolen." Like, we're already seeing like, seeding the entire ecosystem with things that are, allegedly gonna go wrong. And I really started noticing like a lot of people being confidently wrong on the internet, saying things that just like I couldn't believe were happening. Things like the Electoral College is a university you can graduate from. Like that, like that, like things that are just objectively false. This is not even a matter of opinion of like who's the best candidate. This is like, that's not a real thing. There's no University of Electoral College. That's
it.
not a facility that you can go to. So the number of people confidently wrong on the internet it was intolerable, and I decided that I could either make a couple videos that would hopefully outlive the comment section on Facebook, or I could spend the next, 6 months arguing with strangers in the comment section.
Yeah.
So, it was just sort of a fateful decision to just make a couple of little videos that I never thought would go anywhere, and, it mushroomed into something much larger than that. How
You
about
know
you,
what I
though? I wanna hear more about how you got started.
Yeah, so for me, I always tell people, the person I am on the internet, the person I am now is the same person I was in the classroom.
Mhm.
I think as educators, though, we are taught to devalue what we do in a sense. Like people don't look at it as like it's that important. People look at it as maybe a transitional career you go to, or maybe just a second career because you can't get another job. This for me was really a calling. Like my mom
Yeah.
was an educator in Chicago public schools for nearly 40 years, a principal and things like that too.
Mm.
I was on the verge of flunking out from college, and I decided to take a Black History course because it occurred to me that although I went to a Black high school and I was in a Black neighborhood, I had never really taken a Black History course. So I didn't. I mean, I knew about myself from my parents and the
Yeah.
environment we had, but I wasn't necessarily like able to sit down in a structured format. I took that class, and for the first time, this was actually 20 years ago this semester. That was the first time I cared about my education. Up until that point, I was
Hold on,
just,
let me
yeah, yeah,
interrupt you. You
yeah.
literally look like you're 26 years old. That's
Thank you.
truly my
You
impression.
can't see the grades, that's why.
No, I my impression has always been like, "Oh, yeah, he's, like, in his mid to late 20s." So these numbers are not computing, okay? I'm
That
gonna
is
need you
a
to recalculate. The numbers are not computing.
Hey, Imma just say 20 years ago this
That's
year,
crazy.
this
Okay,
was my
continue.
second
I'm
semester of my
listening.
freshman year. Yeah, yeah. So, you know what? For the first time in my life, I decided to take a Black History course, and for the first time in my life, I fell in love with education. Up until that point, some of
Mhm.
y'all can relate. Your parents are pressuring you. They say, do it was an expectation I had at home. Go to college,
Yeah,
do good in school. Yeah. But that was the first time I said, I want to sit in the front row now. Like I
yeah.
want to actually read not for the grade, but I want to read because I care. And I always tell my dad this in hindsight because he gave me like a credit card to buy my books and stuff. I started buying extra books from other classes on Black History.
Yeah.
I didn't tell him that until they pay it all, right? I could pay him back his money. But it was like, no, I want to read. I never had Frederick Douglass's book assigned, but I saw it next to an assigned book for my course. So I bought it.
Mhm.
And like that blew my mind. And for me,
Yeah.
it became a thing of we have a wealth of information, a wealth of knowledge we're not taught about. I have to give this back because once we learn it, we begin to because as a black man, oftentimes in this country, you begin to internalize what you see on the outside and you think it's because of your own decisions or lack of. But what
Mhm.
Black history gave me was an understanding of the systemic issues
Mhm.
that were at play. And there's a brother I follow, a therapist named Resma Menicum. He said something that there's nothing wrong with you, something happened to you. And I think that's the best way to kind of encapsulate what history did for me.
Mm.
So I said, I
Mhm.
got to teach. I have to because once you learn this, oh, it ain't no going back. Once you
Yeah,
go down a rabbit hole, you just keep digging.
yeah.
So I started teaching in Chicago and in the Chicago area in Joliet. And 6 years into teaching, that's when I dealt with the hate crime. Up until that point, I had not done content. I thought it was weird to talk on your phone by yourself and to expect people to,
Alone in the room to by
yeah,
yourself.
like I
Mhm.
just didn't think that made sense. But I knew I should do a little more. Maybe you can relate, like, but it was like, but what do I do? So when that hate crime happened, I was actually recording it as it was occurring and it was
Mhm.
escalating. So she calls us the N word. She eventually spat on me and my wife, and she's calling the cops at the same time to help her out on the south side of Chicago at a majority black event. And when we left, we had all the evidence. So at that point, I was driven. I became because I was only that educated behind closed doors. I was a
Yeah.
little intimidated, right? I mean, I was one of a few black men in that school district. I wasn't probably, for a while, I wasn't tenured, so you got to be very careful when you're
Mhm.
not tenured.
Mhm.
So I came out my shell in that moment. I posted it online. I was asking for help to find the person, and then the news started contacting me, and then people wanted me to share my story. 2017, I started speaking to kids in different school districts on cultural competency. I was creating content, sharing, but like it wasn't really, people care about the viral moment, but they don't really care
Yeah.
about anything else, right? I was making real vague content, but in 2021, kind of like you, it was like, well, we're in the midst of the pandemic. Um, my kids are asking me stuff that I know is just wrong. Like it's
Mhm.
just but it's on TikTok. So in
Yeah.
between them doing all the trendy dances, trying to show me all the trends and me thinking it's a foolish app, and them asking me questions about the civil rights movement and different memes they saw that I just knew were. I had a kid one day share a story with me. He said, "Is this true?" And the video was like Dr. King only fought um, for integration because he wanted to date white women. That was the video, and it had gone viral. I was like, there is no way.
Hold up.
But I, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That was it. That was it. Yeah,
Mhm. Yeah,
and
like, we're not we can't I can't
we
I
can't.
have to do something about this. You felt
Got
compelled.
to.
Yeah, yeah.
And you think too, so and you can relate as an educator. The humbling thing is you get to a point where you realize that the things that you take for granted as historical or civic political common sense are not actually common for everybody. So you have to say, I cannot assume that kids know about the Civil War,
Right?
1619, things like that. So I said, I have to be in this space. I can do the green screen. I saw some educators that were starting to do that. So I said, let me get us a shot. In March of 2021, I made a video about Ida B. Wells, and I called her a G. I spoke the language of myself, my kids, my community, and it
Mhm.
got more views than I had ever seen on any platform. And I said, well, let me keep going. Let
Yeah.
me keep
Yeah.
going. And by the following year, 2022, I was able to leave my teaching job because it became the content contracts balanced with teaching and grading, and that's
Mhm.
a 9 to 9 job, not a 9 to 5.
Mhm.
So I had to make a decision, and my vision was always I wanted to be a Black history teacher of the world, not
Yeah.
just 30 kids in a classroom at a time. And I knew too that just because I got some semblance of justice when I fought my hate crime, it's not enough, right? Just because we might feel safe in our homes for a moment does not mean that that's not enough. That person, that agent could come to our door at some point. So when
Mhm.
I tell these stories, it's so that we can connect it to the cycles of today and that we can better strategize. And it's been a journey. It's been a journey. I never
Mhm.
thought that
Mhm.
we would be here, but I knew it was some work ahead of us.
Yeah. 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 Well, I'm glad you're doing what you're doing.
Likewise.
I'm grateful for your work.
Can you tell me this too? So when you left the class, right? So I'm thinking so 10 years ago, 2016, um, did you at all teach when he was the president, or were you out before then?
No, no, I was out before the Trump presidency.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I hear from teachers all the time, and I don't know, how many like, what the ratio of educators to students is in your community.
Mm,
I don't know if you know that, but I know that I have a lot of teachers in my community, and so I hear from a lot of them about, like, work in an area that says that I'm not allowed to say that, that such and such person was racist
yeah,
because that will make the white children feel bad.
yeah.
I'm not allowed to say that that it was a racist policy of the United States federal government because that
Mm,
implies systemic racism. And systemic racism is critical race theory, and critical race theory is banned.
yeah.
Those are not unusual sentiments that I hear from people regularly. And so I can really imagine what a difficult position so many teachers find themselves in today, trying to sort of thread the needle of keeping the wolves at bay, but also telling the truth. And
Mm,
that is such a, that's in some places, that is such a
yeah,
difficult thing to have, to thread the needle with because if they get fired, they're no good to anybody, but yet if they lie to the children, they're no good to anybody. And that's
yeah.
a really tough position to be in, and I agree with your assessment that, it does seem like in many ways we've gone backward, on this topic, where we now need to remove from the National Park Service, plaques that talk about, how the man who shot Medgar Evers was racist. We're not allowed to say that he was a white supremacist. We wh
Yeah,
What was he then? What are we just gonna be
yeah,
like, "Oh, he mowed his neighbor's lawn, what a nice man, and one day he shot Medgar Evers?" Like,
yeah,
what is the message that we are supposed to internalize then?
right.
If the man who shot Medgar Evers wasn't racist, who is?
Mm,
Like,
mm,
what's the answer to that question? I think that's a question that a lot of, not just students, but educators have in this moment? Like, are we, I'm sure you've seen the removal of
Mhm.
the display in Philadelphia that talked
Yes.
about the
Yes.
history of enslavement in that area. Like we need to pretend that this isn't real because that's DEI. It's like, in the 1950s, when J. Edgar Hoover wanted to get rid of civil rights organizations, he would just label them communist.
Mhm.
If it's communist, it's bad. If it's bad, we gotta get rid of it. Like, it was
Yes.
not a long leap in his mind, just everything's communist. And now we are literally engaged in the exact same practice
Mhm.
that J. Edgar Hoover was out, running around with in the 1950s. It's the exact same practice. We are just substituting we're substituting DEI and CRT for communist. It's the exact I mean, like, the people always say, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes or it echoes. Like, this is as close to a repeat as we've had
Yeah.
in a while.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
a repeat. We're just substituting one word for another.
If you took out some of the dates and you just looked at some of the things this current president has said, if you look at some of the things our past leaders have said about the moments they were in, you would think that they're talking about right now, and you would think that he was talking about 50 years ago.
Mhm.
It is very eerie. I think of it like if someone successfully robbed the bank before, and they wanted to do the same plan again. They would make sure that you weren't able to see the news story about how that bank was robbed again, or even probably how people fought against the robbers, right? It's like we want to keep doing this. We have to keep doing this. We have to keep distracting you. So we have to make sure you don't know about that. What's really deep too about Philadelphia, this is something because I'm really closely tied to the people there and the organizers. A lot of folks don't realize that Philadelphia is the only major city in the country that requires that every child take Black history before they graduate. So this is
Oh, I didn't
on a
know that.
they just celebrated that 20-year anniversary, and this is very deep because when you think about the removal of those public displays
Mhm.
in a city where kids have to learn about it, it's almost like some of what you're doing is not almost, but it's very performative. If you ever go to Philadelphia and you walk the streets, not just downtown, but everywhere you go, it's a museum. They have everything documented. That was the largest free Black population at one point in time in this country. It was the hub. It was the end point for the Underground Railroad, where
Right.
people like William Steele were, and even before then, Richard Allen, where Henry Box Brown was mailed to. So, like that information being concealed is almost like, well, we don't want you to know because we want to plan on doing that again. I would tell folks, think about what I'm sorry, Florida was doing for a while the past few years. When I went to speak to a group of kids, I want to say this was 2024. I spoke for Dr. King's holiday to high school students. And when I was going there, they had to prep me. They told me like, look, okay, because Ron DeSantis like this, and that. Hey, you can. We want you to talk about King, but we don't want you to talk about. You can't say his name. You can't say Ron DeSantis explicitly, right? You can't
Mhm.
say even though it's obvious that what he's doing is countering what King was for, you cannot explicitly say it. So I had to be very creative. And honestly, in any corporate setting, we already know that we can't call a thing, but we can show you everything and you make the decision. So for the educators out there, especially those in history, especially those who are really grappling with this, I would highly recommend that look, you show the kid, I mean, and truthfully, that's what we do anyway. Show the kids the obvious thing right there. Let them draw the conclusion. And you have to be a great gauge of like where you are too, because at the school I was at, I could close my door and have real conversation. I didn't have to worry
Sure.
about anything.
Yeah.
Like these
Yeah.
kids, they were all on board. But in some spaces, you might have a couple kids, or maybe the majority, who are like, "Oh yeah, I'm telling mommy,
Yeah.
I'm telling daddy, I'm about to get you fired." Right? Talk about these things with your union, but let's not talk about Black history. Let's not talk about U.S. history, and not act like if you're talking about westward expansion that we're not also talking about imperialism and colonialism right now.
Mhm.
What I want to ask you too is so my middle school daughter just had to take and pass, the Constitution. That's a requirement. Got to take it in seventh grade. Got to take it again in high school. You got to know these things. And I taught it for the first like 5 years. I was an educator too, and it was always troubling to me, because we only got a semester for it, so we had to put all of that, and we hardly focused on local politics too, and I didn't like that. But there was so much to cover in a shorter period of time. But I
Yeah.
wanted to make sure kids not only knew these amendments, especially the first 10 and number one, of course. But I wanted them to think about what it meant to apply that. And we've seen kids across the country, right, exercise that by walking out and things like that. If you are a government a civics teacher in this moment, what would you say are some of the most pressing things that our kids have to walk away with right now?
Mm, that's a great question, and I think you bring up a really good point, which is that children need to be taught not just one time what their rights are. In over half of states right now, you can graduate from high school without have ever having taken a required government class. They are
Mm,
not required for graduation in over half of states, and in a large percentage of the remaining states, you only have to take one semester of a government class to graduate from high school. And we would never say that you are proficient in a subject having taken one semester of it in high school. We would never be like, "You're fluent in Spanish. You took one semester. You definitely learned how to do all the pottery in the one semester. You know calculus, you took one semester." That's absurd. You cannot assume any level of mastery of a subject when a 15-year-old takes 3 or 4 months of it the one time,
mm,
right? Like, that's not mastery of a topic.
right.
So I would say that one of the things that collectively, especially as social studies educators, but I would say this is true of educators more broadly and definitely of parents, that we need to be teaching our children what their rights are
Mm,
repeatedly, obnoxiously. The children need to be like, "Yeah, I know. I already know that." And when the children say, "I already know that," that is not a symbol to stop doing it. That is not a sign to back off of talking
mm,
about it. That's them being age appropriately annoyed with you being a lame adult. That
mm,
does not mean stop talking about it. So one of the things I would always, when I was in the classroom, I wanted to make sure that my students knew more than the average adult. I wanted them to finish that class being able to tell me who your elected representatives are. Who are your senators? Who is your representative? I wanted them to remember what the three branches of government are. The number of people who work in the government who cannot tell you the three branches of government is really astounding. So, not on my watch. So I instituted this what became almost a joke, but it worked, was that every single test that we had for the entire year asked that same series of questions. Now, it went on to talk about other things too, but it asked the same series of questions so that children would be forced to move that information into their long-term memory. That it
mm,
was not a short term, I memorized it for the test. Yeah, I've heard of the Fourth Amendment. But I want you to move that into your long-term memory so that when you get to be a 34-year-old adult and you're confronted with a situation in Minneapolis, Minnesota, or Chicago, Illinois, that you are able to recall that from your long-term memory storage of
mm.
what the Fourth Amendment does for you, what the First Amendment does for you. Those types of things, I think we can all collectively annoy our young people with.
Yeah.
The more they're annoyed by it, the more they're going to remember it.
Mm,
That's just true. That's just
yeah.
how the human mind works. So that's really foundational. If you understand what your rights are, you can much better advocate for yourself and your neighbors. And if
Mm,
you don't understand what your rights are, it becomes easy to become manipulated and taken advantage of. And that's another thing that I always tried to teach my students, is something I try to teach people on the internet today. Like, there are forces that benefit from trying to manipulate you. And they want you to believe that the following things are true. Nothing you do matters. Might as well give up now. The people in power have too much power and you'll never gain any of it back. Stop trying to advocate for your rights and just give up in advance.
mm,
All of these ideas that push against people in the struggle for collective freedom, all of these ideas, are very strong and require a certain mindset to resist. And
mm,
we cannot just hear it one time from one teacher and expect to have developed a healthy mindset around these things. So to me, this is part of our collective work as adults.
yeah.
Is that we need to learn these things for ourselves. And unfortunately, there are not enough adults who receive this education in high school because, as I mentioned, Half of states don't require it. And they're now in the process of learning it and internalizing it for themselves as adults. But this is our responsibility collectively as adults to help the young people in our lives, beginning in, I would say, later elementary school and going all the way up through
Mm,
college, to
yeah.
internalize these foundational ideas of how government is meant to work. Because if you know how it is meant to work, it is very easy for you to see in what ways that is not happening.
Mm. That is wow. So just like you said, you didn't know about Philadelphia mandating Black history be taught. I had no idea. You said about half of this
Half of
country.
states do not require a government class to graduate from high school.
So half of this country, kids can graduate from high school at voting age and not understand
Having
anything.
taken zero government classes and get elected to the Senate.
Wow.
And then when
Yeah,
asked
yeah.
what are the three branches of government, answer that question incorrectly. Like that's
Mm.
actually a thing that is true in America today.
And what that does too is so that leaves it then to the community, the parents, and those who come from, certain privileges economically, racially, or whatever, and otherwise, they can get those kids prepared, but all the other kids will be left in the dark. And I don't think folks realize how troubling and disturbing that is that you can look we had to teach a semester, and I feel like that wasn't enough at all.
No, one
But
semester's not enough.
and you have to take and I love English, right? But every year you gotta take it every year, and you
Yes.
should. But
Yes, right.
one some and half of the country, nothing, nothing. 3 years of math in my state. I think 2 years
Right.
of like
2
science.
years of most states have 2 years of a foreign language requirement.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah.
and especially if you're on a four-year college track, you have to have taken almost all four-year colleges require 2
Mm,
years, at least 2 years of a foreign language.
r
So imagine being required, and this is no shade to foreign languages. I think that's important too.
yeah,
Arts are important. Like none of this is shade to other subjects.
yeah,
I don't want any teachers to be like, you're dissing Spanish. Not at all. I think Spanish is like learning another language is great. But the idea that you can graduate learning nothing about the system that directly controls your life,
yeah,
but learning, how to conjugate Spanish verbs, there's something not right there.
yeah,
Both
yeah,
of those things can be important at the same time.
exactly. And I think it leaves to me, it's a reflection of the purpose of our public education system, as opposed to what it should be for. Because even with if we say half, right, then I wonder how many within a half are actually teaching it in a manner in which our kids are learning the application skills. Because
Mhm.
we're celebrating 250 years this year. We're celebrating also 100 years of Black History Month. There's a lot going on. So, but you cannot teach U.S. history. You can't teach Black history or civics, and remove that First Amendment, those Bill of Rights from this moment, because there are places that require this that will say, okay, kids, take this test, learn this, learn the context of the Boston Tea Party and things like that, and learn the context of the Boston Massacre. But then if you try to walk out because you are protesting against this administration and what you believe in, you'll be reprimanded for that. It's counterproductive, but it speaks so much to the contradictions that exist now. I think, and I want to give folks a couple ideas too, right? So my daughter, again, middle school, her teacher, they had them write a letter, a hypothetical letter. I think they actually probably maybe they did send it. I mean, they get a million letters, I'm sure, in the executive branch, but they had to write a letter to the president about something they are concerned about and care about. That's after they took the Constitution test. So that's something that we can all model at home. And quite frankly, what I want folks to get from this is, as former classroom teachers, it is not really our job to give your kids everything. It's an introduction. And we hope that you are able to in some ways create the environment at home. But here's the thing, you don't have to go to school for this to then do it. That's where, of course, people like us can come in online, but also to all the different variety of resources we have. Because now what you're making me say is, damn, my daughter did take the test, and we do talk about these, but I need to explicitly name what she's doing. Because she also had this question of, and again, I'm not trying to take shots at my English folks out here, but I don't know, did you read The Outsiders when you were in school?
I don't think so.
Okay,
Is
so
that
that
the
was a
book, like, with the miniature people?
I honestly can't. I know it came from the
I guess
60s.
not. I guess I haven't read it.
Yeah, I okay. Well, I read it. I went to school in Chicago. My daughter's in the suburbs, and I think my mom. I don't know. Like it's something that there are certain things that are just like tradition, in our
Yeah.
curriculums. And I
Yeah,
read it
yeah,
20 some years ago. My 30 whatever. My daughter read it now, and but
yeah.
her school does a great job of having them do independent reading. And she was reading a book about the experiences of some black teens and like an inner city, and she was like, this should also be a part of the curriculum. And how do we go
Yeah.
about that? So I told her, I said, well, look, that's a great point because I often wonder that too. And there are so many like elements of like whether it be the books you read, whether it be the hip hop artists, that I think should be incorporated too. So I said, look, you just took the Constitution, the First Amendment. Here's a few things you can do. You have freedom of speech, petition, right? You can write an email to somebody, right, in the school, the
Mhm.
English teacher, the principal, something like that. If you don't feel like you get a satisfactory answer, maybe you can petition. Maybe you can go around the school, get some support. Maybe you go to the school board meeting. These are all different things
Yeah.
we can teach our kids to do. I mean, you could. I mean, if you like protest, whatever, you can create your own. That freedom too. You can create a club, a book club yourself, of people who want to read the type of books you want to. But I think it's so important for us to empower our kids in the manner you said, to make sure that like I'm even thinking how we do the pledges every morning. Maybe the pledge should be reciting our rights, right? Like maybe it should be I have the right freedom of
Amendment 1.
speech.
What are the 5 freedoms in the First
you know,
Amendment? Yeah.
something like I swear,
Yeah.
if we juxtapose that to like you saying the pledge, okay, now because of that pledge, bam, you can do this. And and
Mhm.
and think about how empowering that would be. But also too, think about the fact that when you teach your kids what they have the right to do, then you give them that action. Okay, now how can we apply this today? I want to ask you too about this because again, one of my gripes with teaching government was the curriculum we had. We spent, I would say, less than a week on the local government. And that
Mhm.
was really the state. We talked about like the term limits and we talked about you can vote for the state rep and everything. We didn't even touch on the city council. I
Yeah.
had to learn about that just by wanting to figure out how best to be engaged. I mean, out here, I don't know about y'all, but we don't just have counties, we have townships and stuff. And it's like,
Yeah.
it's all of these different things, the park district board. So
Right. What does the water board do? Yeah.
right, exactly. And that's all
Yeah.
like our tax money pays for all of this stuff. So what do you say to the not just the educator, but the parent who's like, this is too much. This is overwhelming. I don't even know. But we know the best place to start is locally. So what would you recommend for that?
Yeah, it's such a great point, and this is something that people have been pointing out forever, that, all government is local, and that your local government has the biggest impact on your daily life. It has the biggest impact on your schools, on your community's safety, on the services and amenities that are offered to your community. What kind of environment are your kids growing up in? That is all more impacted by your local government than it is by, some of these yahoos in Congress, right? And there are some good people in Congress too.
Yeah,
But we can all think of a few
not
yahoos at minimum, right?
more than a few.
So
Yep.
a few, just a few. One of the ways I like to think about it is if you understand how the federal government works, if you understand the concept of this triangle of the three branches of government and how they relate to each other at the federal level, that you have, the president as the head of the executive branch, and you have Congress as the head of the legislative branch, and the Supreme Court as the head of the judicial branch. That triangle exists at the state level as well, that you have the governor as the head of the executive branch, your state legislature, your state Supreme Court. And that triangle also exists sometimes in a more modified fashion, but it also exists at a local level.
Mm,
And so you have a mayor as the head of the executive branch, you have your city council or your county council or your town council or, whatever it's called at your local municipality, as the head of the legislative branch. And you often have local courts as well. So if you stop thinking about it in the sense of like there's 25 names to learn, and you just think about it in this concept of like these are just kind of concentric
mm,
triangles that exist within each other, and sometimes this inner triangle has a different name than it might, in the neighboring county or in the neighboring state. I mean, um, it becomes a little less overwhelming. And
mm,
so then when you understand what the legislative branch and the executive branch do, then it becomes easier to understand where all of these other little boards come from. What is the city water board? What is the
mm.
school board? What do all of these things do and how do they relate to the legislative branch, or the executive branch. So understanding, like the big picture and then sort of moving into the smaller pictures, I actually think is an easier way to sort of wrap your mind around how to conceptualize these things rather than
Mm,
memorizing a list of boards and a list of
mm,
offices. They understanding how the branch works, that the executive branch is making rules about laws that have been passed by the legislative branch. Okay, we
mm,
want clean water. How do we, so, the legislative branch says, clean water, please. How
mm,
does the executive branch then actually carry out clean water, please? And
mm,
so then understanding, okay, so then we're going to make rules about no dumping toxic chemicals in the water. Now, who's going to make sure that no toxic chemicals are dumped in the water? In your local municipality, it might be your water board. It might be called something else. But once you understand that relationship, the concept becomes so much easier to understand when you understand the
mm.
relationship between lawmaking and rulemaking.
You just broke that down in such an amazing way. I wish I knew that perspective when I was in the class because I could have told my kids all the different.
Just like concentric triangles. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that is really cool. And I would say too, like, and I think a question you probably get, and I get a lot when folks, are speaking to us or just wanting to learn more. They say, "Well, what can I do? How can I get involved?" And I would say, even based on your explanation, I would tell them my journey in terms of when I dealt with the hate crime and I started to think about what I could do to be engaged more. I started to think locally. So I started to look up the city council. So I would say for everybody out there, first off, let's make sure that, of course, you register to vote. Let's make sure that you know when the next election is, right? Because local elections historically, abysmal, at least like around me in the county
Terrible.
I'm in, adjacent to Chicago, I'm talking 10% voter turnout. And that's 10% of
Yeah.
registered voters. All right. We ain't even talking about everybody,
Yeah.
right? So like we need to honestly, it should be at least the same as the federal, really more because it's local, right? It's your neighborhood, it's your street, it's your school, it's the park, it's I mean it's the signs, it's the street lights, it's all of that, the water. Um, find your city council member. Go to some of these meetings. If you don't have the courage to speak up yet, at least make your face shown. Because when I started going to these meetings, I was the only one there. It was me and a couple reporters. We were the only
Yeah.
ones, right? Like when
Yeah.
I started to speak up. That is when I found my tribe. Because when I started to speak up about different things, and these things are shown locally, then you find other people who care. Beyond that, go
Hmm.
to the school board meeting. If you're really concerned about what's going on now, you as a independent citizen, you are not in the school. You're not a teacher. You can speak on behalf of the teachers who care more than they feel they can. So if you want to make sure, look, our kids should be learning more about their rights every year. You go to the public comment section and you say that. You feel like your kids should be learning Black history. It should be mandated like the Philadelphia. You go to the school board and say that. And here's what you then do. After you do that, y'all, you got to make sure you come back the next time with some more people because the first time you said they're going to be shocked. They might pay attention. They might say that's just one person. We don't care. If you come back with the organization, they going to care. The best way to get organized, y'all, I'm trying to break this down. The best way to get organized is to join an organization. It's that simple.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Everybody thinks they need to reinvent the wheel from scratch. How do I get the president to do blah blah blah? They think like they personally need to roll this boulder up the hill. No, there's power in numbers. This is how it has always worked. And the best way to get numbers is to join an organization that does the work that you agree with.
And they
That's how
already
it's
exist.
always worked. Yes, yes.
I promise you. Like,
And maybe it doesn't. Maybe you have some special thing about the park in your neighborhood. Maybe you do need to start an organization for that. But if you are advocating for things like First Amendment rights for students, that organization exists, and
yeah,
you can find community in these kinds of
yeah.
organizations.
Yeah, and you might just need to Google, political organizations. They probably got a Facebook group or something like that. When
Yeah.
you begin to show that strength in a local election, I mean, you can come in there 10 deep. That could sway an election. They're gonna start paying
Yep.
attention to you. If you want to
Yep.
get to the point where those city council members, those school board members, park board members, whatever, when you come in, you want to see them roll their eyes. I get that still. Like
Yep.
I come in there, they like, oh, what is he about to talk
Here
about
we go.
now? Here we
Here we
go,
go.
because he
You
ain't
want
gonna
them
shut
to
up.
think to themselves, here we go.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
that's exactly what you want. Either they're gonna think like, "Yes, here we go," like the people
Yeah.
who've shown up, or they're gonna
Yeah.
be thinking like, "Oh, here we go." Either way, that's
Yep.
a reaction you wanna provoke. I in my state legislature here in Minnesota, I am represented by somebody who won election to the Minnesota State Legislature by fewer than 40 votes. Fewer than 40 votes was the spread between the person who represents me and their opponent.
Mm,
So if you don't and
mm,
if you don't think that local elections matter,
mm.
all it would have taken was, 50 more people to show up, and
Yeah.
the election could have swung in an entirely different direction. I want to ask you too, because I know that we don't have all the time in the world, even though I wish we did. I
Mhm,
want to ask you too, what can parents, teachers, community members do to advocate for proper representation of Black history in
mm.
schools? What can they
Yeah.
do if their school is falling short and the parents are like, my kids are only learning about Rosa Parks as a sidebar that one day in
Yeah.
February, and that's like the extent of their Black history education? What
Yeah.
can citizens and teachers do to make sure that their kids are not graduating from high school knowing two names, Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks?
Yeah, or as I say, the Fave 5 is King, is Parks, X, Tubman, and, Douglas. Those are the fave, you'd be lucky. Sometimes you don't even get to all 5.
I think
But
you'd be lucky to get Douglas and X. I
yeah,
think
yeah,
you'd be
yeah, right,
lucky.
right, right. And
Mhm.
and just a quick, like, context, when I used to talk about King and X and the Civil Rights Movement, I would always ask kids what they knew. And I was always doing that on purpose because kids would always be like, "Oh, yeah, X was violent and King was
Yes.
nonviolent." And I would be like, "Okay, show me proof that Malcolm X was violent." And they were like, "Well," I mean, I had kids tell me that the Panthers were the black version of the Klan. This is where this miseducation is deep, right? That's a
Mhm,
great question right there. And what I would say is I'm almost certain that your school isn't doing enough. I would guarantee
mhm,
it. I
mhm.
would
Right.
guarantee it because for one, the best way to get this information is going to be from people who have the lived experience or people who, if they don't look like us, have specialized in that pedagogy. I would elevate people like James Lowen, a white brother who uncovered sundown towns, by using his privilege to go into these spaces to navigate that.
Yeah,
So you can be pretty sure your kid is not learning that. I would just say, like, from
yeah.
my perspective, I mean, I have a book that's, of course,
Mhm,
paid, but I have free resources too. Outside of my videos, I have a free Black History Month course. I call it Black History Month and Beyond. Like, it's 30
mhm.
days. It was a course I was actually Emmy nominated for CBS Chicago, and the script is there, an opener is there, a closer is there, the video is there. You can incorporate that. You don't have to know a lot. Just press the button once a week
Yeah,
for the
I
school
love
year.
that.
It's 30
Yeah,
videos. You in school, you know what I'm saying? So, like, you're gonna have something,
yeah.
right? But I would also say that, especially if you are not black, your voice in this matters a lot because we've been speaking up for ourselves
Yes,
for a long, long time, right?
yes,
That's like we
yes.
ain't new to this, we true to this. We've been doing this. So, like, we understand that black history doesn't just benefit black folks. This is something
That's
that if
right.
you learn that perspective, it's going to enrich us all because as a
That's right.
country, we cannot be whole unless we put the pieces back together with black folks and of course the indigenous community as well. Again, city council, I'm sorry, school board meeting, speak up about that, or just really you ask a question, email, right? Um, Here's what I would say too. When I was in school to get my degree in teaching, like I was not for my history degree, I was not required to take these histories. You're required to
Mhm.
take like something what they would say is alternative, but you don't have to take that, right? So
Right.
your social science teacher, your history teacher for your child might not know a lot. So then you can
Mhm.
request training. There are trainers across the area that can do things like that. But also too, I think teachers have to be willing to want to teach, but also too willing to admit that they don't know enough, and that's okay. Because I'm gonna give you an example of how I lived this. Because when I started teaching in a bigger district outside of Chicago, I was teaching at a school that was black, white, Latino, but it was majority Latino. Okay, and I
Mhm.
would never forget a Latino Mexican student asking me. He said, "Mr. Krim, what were Mexicans doing during slavery?" And I did not know.
Mhm.
And I stopped for a second, and I honestly told him, I said, "Now a lot of this will be based, skin color. Of course, we know." Latinos have indigenous ancestry too, but I'm gonna be quite honest with you. I have not studied that enough and I don't know, but I'm going to find out and we should find this out together because that's important. It's not always on the
Right.
teacher, right? We can learn this together. And there's a lot of things that I learned from him just in terms of the culture that I was not familiar with. We have to humble
Right.
ourselves and say, I
Yes.
know about what it means to be black in America. I know what it means to be from Chicago. I know what it means to go to this school, but I don't know what it's like to be Mexican growing up during, Trump's ascension and everything, but I can find that overlap. Then I can go to people in the community. I can get some books. You're gonna have to learn outside of class. You're gonna have to go to
Mhm.
the people online, the experts, the other people you know in the building, and say, "Can you help me with this?" But also, too, I don't want to put that onus on the person. Do the research. Be bold enough to do this because y'all, even if we want to get to the economics of it all, we understand economically that our country is losing out on trillions of dollars by not resolving the issues of racism and systemic racism. That has been proven. Diversity makes us all stronger. Having and even if you want to break this down, if we don't even say racial diversity, there's a difference in being Black American and being directly from the continent right now. You know what I'm saying? That
Mhm. Mhm.
diversity of experience, background,
Mhm.
all of this matters. But if you have access, if you have that racial privilege in this society, I would say be emboldened to speak up in this moment because the
Yes.
future of this country is going to be predicated upon a lot of white folks beginning to do that work.
Mm. I think you're exactly right. Let me ask you one quick question, and again,
Yeah,
I know that we're almost out of
yeah,
time,
yeah, yep,
but
yep,
one thing that I hear from white folks is they're afraid of doing it wrong, and they're afraid of
yep,
stepping on people's toes, and they're afraid of saying the wrong thing and accidentally, inadvertently, even if they have good intentions, of offending or causing more harm,
yeah,
and so it causes them to, you
yeah,
shrink back from advocating.
yep,
What would you say to them? What would you say to them in this moment? Even if when they're listening to you say, I agree with that, like I need to
yeah.
use what I have to better advocate for others. What would you
Mhm.
say to somebody who's afraid of doing it wrong?
I would say first off, how much do you really care about the future of the people who live here, including your children?
Mhm.
I would say that being wrong, yeah, that's a fear. But there are people now who fear walking outside. Like my
Mhm.
ancestors, like, I mean, you could be in prison, whipped, beaten for reading a book. So we got to give ourselves that perspective. Um, I think that we have to give ourselves permission. So you don't wait till the perfect time to do things. You perfect it as you go. I'll tell you the same thing I tell students, right? Because a lot of times when you'll be speaking to a group of kids and you'll ask a question and the kids will just stare. And you can also tell when there's a kid who might know or just wants to raise their hand, but they're hesitant. For everybody listening, white folks, everybody really, we are not here. We are not. Y'all not watching this because you got it all together, right? I know I ain't got it all together. We're here to learn. So sometimes that
Mhm.
takes metaphorically raising your hand, getting it wrong, and staying curious. I always judge people based off intent. There have been times when I've been microaggressed, and I know it wasn't intentional. It still stings a little bit, but I know that that person didn't have ill will. I can't take
Sure.
everything personal, right? There's a difference between that and somebody explicitly targeting me like the person did almost 10 years ago. I think that we have
Mhm.
to realize, look, this country was founded on the tenets of racism and genocide. So the culture that you were brought up in wants you to believe that you are superior, wants you to believe that you're perfect, wants you to believe that you are greater than all the rest.
Mhm.
If you want to begin to unlearn that, you just have to be like, yo, I haven't figured out anything. Um, have people you can go to talk to. I have close friends, various races. We have conversations about these things that they probably wouldn't want to post online because if we're being real, people of all backgrounds can be very judgmental on this space. This ain't really the
Yeah.
space sometimes to have heart-to-heart conversations, right?
Mhm.
I'm also tell y'all, like I've told people in several interviews now when they say, "But what should we be doing?" Some of what we should be doing should not be discussed right now. Like it was
Mhm.
an underground railroad. It was led by black folks who were freedom seekers, and it was a collaborative effort that included a lot of white folks. And I'm sure if you Google Underground Railroad sites near me, you're gonna find one near you. We talking as far north as Minnesota, where I'm at in the Chicago area. These things were everywhere. learn from
Mhm.
them, right? And I say that because some of the things they did were kept in the dark, and some of the people are evidence that there were probably 10, 20, 30 more that kept it a secret. We have to get in
Mhm.
community with each other and be like that question right there is very important to ask. Somebody might not want to ask me that in person, but we have to understand that it's like you're gonna make some mistakes. We have to
Mhm.
be real and true and say I for me to even learn about the experience of black women in this country, a woman period.
Mhm.
I humble myself and say I don't know,
That's
and
right.
I have to be able to learn. I have to be able to look. I don't care if you got a PhD, y'all. You got to in some of these situations, you got to say I'm going back to school, and
Mhm.
it's just that simple. And be okay with making a mistake, but also too, be in community with folks that will not shame you for being human.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think that's such a good point that we have to have the humility to say what we don't know, and we have to have the wherewithal to educate ourselves. And
Mm-hmm.
we have to understand that the worst thing that could happen to us is not
Yeah.
making a mistake that one time.
Yeah. And
That
it would.
if that's the biggest thing we're worried about, then you have lived a
Yeah.
life of such incredible privilege.
Yeah.
I
For
remember
real.
once my son was 11 years old, and he didn't wanna empty the dishwasher even though that was his job, and he said, "This is the worst day of my life," because I was asking him to empty the dishwasher, and I was like, "Son, either you are so prone to hyperbole that you are the next Mark Twain, or this is really the worst day of your life, in which case, pat on the back for me, because your life has been so charmed that the worst thing that's ever happened to you is you've had to empty a dishwasher."
Yeah.
And that's, of course, a
Yeah.
silly story, but the idea that the worst thing that's ever happened to us is we asked a question and we momentarily felt like we looked stupid. Actually, we
Yeah.
probably didn't, and actually, other people benefited from the question that we asked, or we made a mistake that one time. If that's the worst thing that's ever happened to you, then
Yeah. You
you've
know,
lived a really charmed life.
I want to say this real quick before we wrap up too. I made a post about Bad Bunny recently, and I was talking about how so for me that's always a humbling thing because again, not being like born and raised, even I'm not an Afro Latino, like I don't I've learned being in community and
Yeah,
also too doing research. So I'm like, yo, I didn't understand what he was saying, but I understood the message, and I love
yeah.
the statement at the end. And somebody who presumably was Latino made a statement and said one of the things that a lot of folks in my community cannot stand, and again, he's speaking for himself and his circle, but it might resonate. He said, when we refer to it as simply America, and it feels like we're being excluded. And I was like, whoa,
Mm,
I had never
mhm,
considered that. And again,
mhm,
humbling experience. I'm using that as an example to say that if we have not lived someone's experience, no matter how much we have perfected our own, we are still at like an immature elementary level, and we have to be willing to say this is a journey. I've made mistakes myself teaching this stuff, and I've had to learn. I mean, we say enslaved now, for instance, versus a slave. Like we are all learning and trying our best, but just be willing to humble yourself and say, look, we're gonna figure this out together. If you're not with people who are gonna call you in when you make a mistake, then you already in the wrong circle. So I want to say this too before we go. I'm gonna flip it a little bit to you. You have okay, let's say you were gonna speak to a school in Minnesota and you got held
mhm,
up by some real bad traffic and you was running late. All right. You got there at 3:55. You got 5 minutes left, and you only get an opportunity to say one thing to these kids in Minneapolis right now, and just really for the world, but
mhm.
really Minneapolis. As a government teacher, this country's government teacher, what are you gonna say?
Oh my, I get 5 minutes. I think the most important thing that I would want people to know at this moment is not a set of facts. You can always learn the facts. What I would want people to know is something that Brian Stevenson taught me, which is that hope is not a feeling, that
Mm,
hope is an orientation of the spirit. And that in a moment that feels hopeless, when all you have to do is scroll social media for 30 seconds and you're like, Epstein files, Iran, ICE, like pick a list. The list is never ending. At a moment that feels completely hopeless, Nothing I do matters. Nothing I can do will make a difference. It's very easy to fall prey to that. And if we're waiting for a sense of hope in order to take action, we're waiting for blue skies and chirping birds, then we are going to keep on waiting.
Mm,
And that we need to stop thinking about hope as a feeling to experience, and we need to start thinking about it as a set of actions to take. And that is how we will grow to experience the feeling of hope. And that is the place from which good things in this country can grow. When we believe that the story is not over yet, when the ending has yet to be written, when we have the ability to impact the ending, that changes how we show up in the world. That changes how we show up for our neighbors. That changes how we advocate for ourselves and others. And so, if I only had 5 minutes, I would want people to know that this end has not yet been written, and that
mm.
you get a chance to impact that is.
Woo, that was powerful. And on
Mhm.
that note, we're gonna have to say goodbye. We're gonna need to let
Let's
that
do this again.
marinate for a second. We have to.
Yeah,
We have to. Thank you for
let's
your
do it again.
time. Thank you for the work
My
that you
pleasure.
do. Y'all need to
Likewise.
run this back. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for being here,
Yes.
y'all.
Thank you.
Peace.
See you later.